His lips were still touching the poster when he heard her voice behind him. Not a recording, not his imagination. A real voice asking him a question he never expected to answer out loud. Was that good enough? He turned around, already bracing for a security guard, a stranger, anyone he could apologize to and disappear from. Instead, he was looking directly into the eyes of the woman on the poster, Han Seo-ah, standing 10 feet away, watching him. The exhibition hall around them was silent, the kind of silence that only exists after a crowd has gone home and left its excitement behind like perfume in the air. Rows of velvet ropes stood empty. Spotlights still burned overhead, throwing long shadows across the polished floor. And rising 3 stories tall behind her own shoulder was her face, painted larger than life, the very poster he'd just been caught kissing. Malik Carter wasn't supposed to still be in that building. He was supposed to have clocked out an hour ago, folded up his temp badge, and gone back to his cramped apartment to stare at another rejection email. But something had kept his feet planted on that floor, long after the security guards finished their last sweep, long after the janitorial crew packed up their carts and went home. He'd looked up at her painted eyes and let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "You don't know me," he'd said quietly, his voice swallowed by the size of the room. "But you're the reason I didn't quit." He'd thought about the nights he'd watched her films on a laptop that overheated if he ran it more than an hour. The way her performances had taught him that a story didn't need to shout to be powerful, it just needed to be honest. He'd thought about every producer who'd told him his scripts were promising and then never called back. He'd thought about how close he'd come, more than once, to giving up entirely. And in that empty hall, under lights meant for 1,000 strangers, he'd done something he would never be able to explain rationally to anyone. He'd stepped forward, closed his eyes, and kissed the poster. It lasted only a second, a ridiculous, harmless, private second. He hadn't known, in that second, that he wasn't alone at all. Now, standing 10 feet away in a long charcoal coat, arms crossed, one eyebrow raised in barely contained amusement, Han Seo-ah waited for an answer to a question he had no idea how to answer. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. For a moment, neither of them moved. Malik's mind raced through every possible explanation, every possible apology, and landed on none of them. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. I wasn't. He stopped, exhaled, and decided the only thing worse than getting caught was lying about it. Okay. Yes. I kissed the poster. I have no excuse. She studied him the way she studied a script for the first time, searching for what was real underneath the words. Most people who meet me for the first time try to impress me, she said. You're the first one who's tried to disappear into the floor. Give it a minute, Malik said. I'm working on it. A short laugh escaped her, surprised out of her before she could stop it. And something about that sound, unguarded, unrehearsed, made the whole absurd moment feel less like a disaster and more like a beginning. To understand how Malik Carter ended up alone in an exhibition hall kissing a movie poster, you have to go back 3 years to a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in Los Angeles, where a 27-year-old screenwriter kept a corkboard covered in rejection emails because deleting them felt too much like admitting defeat. Malik had come to Los Angeles with 2 suitcases, 1 finished screenplay, and a belief that talent would be enough. It wasn't. He worked production assistant jobs, catering gigs, anything that let him stay near film sets and keep believing he belonged there. His best friend, Marcus Reed, worked construction by day and dragged Malik out for wings and cheap beer by night, mostly to keep him from disappearing entirely into his laptop and his doubt. You still writing that thing? Marcus asked him one night, nodding at the worn notebook Malik carried everywhere. Every day, and nobody's bought it. Not yet. Marcus shook his head, not unkindly. Man, most people would have quit 2 years ago. Most people didn't watch Times Autumn Rain Times 11 times, Malik said. That was the film that had done it, a quiet Korean drama about a woman rebuilding her life after loss, starring an actress most of America hadn't heard of yet, Han Seo-ah. Malik had stumbled onto it during a slow shift, folding programs at an art house theater, and something about her performance had cracked something open in him. She didn't act like she was performing grief. She acted like she was Times carrying Times it. He went home that night and wrote for 6 hours straight, the first real writing he'd done in months. He never told anyone that a stranger on a screen had saved his career before it even started. It felt too strange to say out loud, too much like admitting he needed saving at all. So when the Korean entertainment company announced a major Los Angeles exhibition and press event for Han Seo-ah's upcoming Hollywood crossover film, and Malik landed a temporary setup job through a production contact, he told himself it was just a paycheck. He told himself he wasn't going to do anything foolish. He told himself a lot of things that night, apparently, none of which turned out to be true. Back in the present, in the hushed exhibition hall, Seo-ah tilted her head, still studying him. Why her? Why that poster? You could have just told a friend you like my movies. Malik considered lying. He considered making a joke and letting the moment pass. Instead, he told her the truth, because some part of him understood that this woman had spent years surrounded by people telling her exactly what she wanted to hear, and he refused to be one more voice in that chorus. I wasn't kissing a poster of a celebrity, he said. I was thanking someone who taught me what honest storytelling looks like, back when I'd basically given up trying to write anything honest at all. You didn't know it. You'll probably forget this happened by next week. But it mattered to me. That's it. That's the whole embarrassing truth. Seo-ah didn't respond right away. In the industry she worked in, people complimented her face, her fame, her box office numbers. Almost no one talked about the work itself, and even fewer talked about it like it had actually changed something in them. What do you do? She finally asked. I write, or I try to. Screenwriter. Currently employed as guy who sets up velvet ropes. That's a very specific decline in job title. You should see my resume. It reads like a horror story. She almost smiled again, catching herself this time. Walk with me, she said. There's a coffee place 2 blocks from here. I'm not allowed to go alone, but Ji-eun's asleep in the car, and I'd rather not wake her for something this small. Malik blinked. You want to get coffee? With the guy who kissed your poster. I want to get coffee, she said, already walking toward the exit. With the first person in longer than I can remember who talked to me like I was a person and not a headline. He followed her out into the cool night air, half convinced he was about to wake up in his apartment above the laundromat, disappointed to discover it had all been a dream brought on by too much instant ramen and not enough sleep. The coffee shop was small, independent, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu that hadn't been updated in months. The barista recognized Seo-ah immediately, and to her credit, said nothing beyond a polite nod and an offer to seat them in the back corner, away from the window. They talked for 2 hours. Not about fame, not about box office numbers or red carpets. They talked about the years Seo-ah had spent as a trainee before her first role, sleeping 4 hours a night and eating instant noodles just like Malik had. Half a world and an entirely different industry away. They talked about Malik's screenplay, a story about a father and son trying to rebuild their relationship after years of silence, inspired loosely by his own strained relationship with his father, who still didn't quite understand why his son had traded a stable job for a stack of rejected scripts. Send it to me, Seo-ah said, as the barista started stacking chairs around them, a not-so-subtle hint that closing time had arrived. Send you my screenplay. Yes. You get scripts from actual studios, professionally packaged, with actual coverage notes. I get scripts from people who want something from me, she said. I want to read something from someone who doesn't. Malik didn't have a clever response to that. He just nodded, feeling something shift quietly in his chest, the unfamiliar, almost frightening sensation of being taken seriously by someone whose opinion he had, until 3 hours ago, only encountered on a screen. That night became the first of many. Coffee became a weekly habit disguised as coincidence. Weekly habits became late-night texts about the films they were rewatching, the writers they admired, the industry's absurdities. Malik learned that Seo-ah collected old paperback novels in 3 languages and read them under blankets on nights she couldn't sleep. Seo-ah learned that Malik still called his mother every Sunday, even during weeks when he had nothing good to report. They talked about failure more than success, about loneliness more than glamour, about the particular ache of being surrounded by people and still feeling unseen. Neither of them called it what it was becoming. Malik told himself he was just grateful for the encouragement. Seo-ah told herself she simply enjoyed the rare relief of a friendship with no professional angle attached. Ji-eun, Seo-ah's manager, watched all of it from a careful distance, saying nothing. though the slight furrow in her brow suggested she was keeping count of every coffee run longer than the last. Then, 3 weeks in, Seo-ah did something she never told Malik about, not at first. She read his screenplay. All of it, twice, alone in her hotel room at 2 in the morning, and found herself crying at a scene she hadn't expected to move her at all. The father, finally admitting to his son that his silence had never been about disappointment, only fear of saying the wrong thing and losing him faster. The next morning, without telling Malik, she sent the script to a director she trusted, a man named Robert Hale, who had built a career finding raw, underappreciated writers and giving them their first real shot. She attached one line: "Read this before you say no to anything else this month." She told herself she was doing it because the work deserved it. She didn't examine too closely why her hands were shaking slightly as she hit send, or why she checked her phone every hour afterward, hoping for a response, the way she hadn't hoped for anything in longer than she wanted to admit. 2 weeks later, Malik's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. "Is this Malik Carter?" a man's voice asked. "This is Robert Hale's office. Mr. Hale read your script. He'd like to meet." Malik nearly dropped his phone into his cereal. He called Marcus first, practically shouting the news into the phone. Then, almost involuntarily, he called Seo-ah, and it was in the middle of that call, in the middle of her congratulations, that something in her voice gave her away. A pause that lasted half a second too long. A relief that sounded less like surprise and more like confirmation. "You knew," Malik said slowly. "You sent it to him." Silence on the line. "Seo-ah, you sent my screenplay to a director without asking me." "I know how that sounds," she said finally. "But Malik, you would have hesitated. You would have talked yourself out of believing it was good enough before you even gave it a chance. I couldn't watch that happen. Not to something that good." "That wasn't your decision to make," he said, and the hurt in his voice surprised even him. "It wasn't about the opportunity. The opportunity was extraordinary, more than he'd dared hope for in years. It was about trust. About feeling like, for once, someone had made a choice about his life without him in the room." "You're right," she admitted quietly. "It wasn't. I'm sorry. I believed in it. I believed in you. And I was scared that if I waited for permission, the moment would slip away before you ever got the chance you deserved." Malik sat with that for a long moment. Anger and gratitude tangled together in a knot he didn't know how to untie. In the end, gratitude won, though the sting of the boundary crossed lingered longer than he let on. "Don't do it again," he said. "Even if you're right, especially if you're right." "I promise," she said, and meant it. The meeting with Robert Hale went better than Malik could have imagined. Within a month, there was a deal. Within 2, pre-production had quietly begun. Malik's world, which had spent years moving in inches, suddenly began moving in miles. And through all of it, Seo-ah was there not as a celebrity, attaching her name to elevate his project, staying carefully out of the credits, out of the press, insisting this success belonged entirely to him. She showed up instead in smaller ways. A congratulatory coffee left with the barista before an early meeting, a message at midnight when he couldn't sleep from nerves, a quiet presence at the read-through she convinced Jion to let her sneak into, sitting in the back row so no one would recognize her. It was there, in that dim rehearsal room, listening to actors bring his words to life for the first time, that Malik looked over and caught Seo-ah wiping her eyes discreetly, trying not to be seen. "You're crying," he whispered. "I'm not," she whispered back, clearly crying. "At my terrible dialogue?" "At good dialogue, written by someone who almost didn't believe he deserved to write it," she said. "Someone finally seeing that he does." That was the moment Malik understood, with sudden and terrifying clarity, that what he felt for her had stopped being admiration a long time ago. He didn't say it. Not yet. Some truths are too large to speak the first time you recognize them. You have to sit with them first, turn them over, make sure you're not imagining their weight. For a while, it seemed like nothing could touch what they'd built. But fame does not allow quiet things to stay quiet for long. And the industry that had made Seo-ah into a global star had never been built to protect ordinary happiness. It started with a photograph. A blurry shot of Malik and Seo-ah leaving the coffee shop together, taken by a fan who hadn't even recognized her at first and only posted it because the lighting looked nice. Within 48 hours, entertainment sites had identified her. Within 72, headlines were speculating about Han Seo-ah's mystery American companion, dissecting every photo they could find, inventing timelines and relationships out of nothing but proximity and imagination. CEO Kang called Seo-ah into his office the following morning. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. "You understand what you've built?" he said, gesturing at the framed magazine covers, lining his office walls, each one bearing her face. 15 years of careful choices, of never giving the public a reason to doubt you, and now they're asking questions I can't answer about a man nobody's ever heard of. "His name is Malik," Seo-ah said quietly, "and he's the reason I still remember why I wanted to act in the first place." "That's lovely," Kang said, not unkindly, but firmly. "It's also irrelevant to the Hollywood studio deciding whether you're a safe investment for their franchise or to the Korean audience who has followed your career expecting a certain image. I'm not telling you who to love, Seo-ah. I'm telling you the cost of loving publicly, in your position, is higher than most people ever have to pay. Are you prepared to pay it? Is he?" She didn't have an answer. Not yet. Meanwhile, in a separate wing of the same industry, actress Yoo Min-seo watched the growing headlines about Seo-ah with an expression that was harder to read. The two women had come up together as young trainees, and though the public rarely mentioned it, there had always been a quiet, simmering rivalry between them. Min-seo, forever one step behind Seo-ah's rising international success, one nomination short, one headline smaller. When a gossip outlet reached out for comment on the mystery man photographed with Seo-ah, Min-seo gave an interview that was, on its surface, gracious. "I'm happy for her. Whatever makes her happy," she said, smiling for the cameras. "Though I do hope, for her sake, that whoever he is understands what he's stepping into. Not everyone can survive that kind of spotlight." The comment was quoted everywhere within hours, framed as supportive, read by anyone paying close attention as something closer to a warning shot. Malik saw the headlines the same way everyone else did in real time, helplessly, from his apartment, watching his private life become public speculation overnight. Marcus showed up with a six-pack and sat with him while he scrolled through comment after comment, some kind, most cruel, all of them written by strangers who had decided they knew everything about a relationship they'd learned about 48 hours earlier. "They're calling me a nobody," Malik said quietly. "A gold digger. Someone said I probably wrote the screenplay about her so she'd notice me." "You wrote that screenplay 2 years before you met her," Marcus said. "Doesn't matter. The internet decided its version of the story, and now that's the story. So what are you going to do?" Malik didn't answer right away. He thought about the exhibition hall, about the coffee shop, about the read-through, and the way she'd cried at his words like they mattered, because to her, they did. He thought about everything he had to lose if this went wrong, and everything he'd never even had the chance to lose before he met her. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I know I'm not going to be the reason her whole career falls apart. I've spent my whole life chasing one dream. I'm not going to let chasing this one cost her everything she built before I even showed up." If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to like this video. Your support helps us continue bringing you more powerful stories like this. The pressure only intensified from there. Seo-ah's team scheduled a series of interviews meant to redirect the narrative press events, panel appearances, careful non-answers about her personal life. In every one, reporters found a way back to the same question. Who is he? She deflected each time, professional, composed, giving nothing away. But off-screen, the strain was wearing on her in ways her publicist couldn't script around. She stopped sleeping well. She stopped answering Malik's texts as quickly as she used to, not out of anger but exhaustion, and fear that every word she typed might somehow end up screenshotted and dissected by strangers. Malik felt the distance growing and didn't know how to close it without making things worse. He showed up at the studio one afternoon, waiting outside after a long day of reshoots, and found her looking more tired than he'd ever seen her, the version of her the cameras never captured. "You've been distant," he said carefully. "I've been protecting you," she said. "There's a difference. Doesn't feel like one from where I'm standing." She exhaled, glancing around the empty parking lot before speaking, as if even here, someone might be listening. "Kang wants me to deny everything. Publicly. Say the photos were misinterpreted, that you're a colleague from the production. Nothing more. He thinks it's the only way to make this go away before the studio gets nervous about the franchise deal." "And what do you want?" "I want it to not have to be a choice," she said, her voice cracking slightly, the first real crack he'd seen in her composure since the night they met. I want to be an actress who's allowed to also be a person. I didn't think that was such an impossible thing to ask. Malik reached for her hand, and for a moment neither of them said anything, just stood there in a parking lot that suddenly felt very small against the enormous, impossible weight of what they were up against. Then don't deny it, he said finally, not because of me, because you deserve to stop performing a version of your life for people who'll never actually know you. But Seo-ah, if choosing honesty costs you everything you've worked for, I need you to understand something first. What? I'm not worth that price. Nobody is. If this breaks your career, it doesn't just hurt you. It takes away the platform that lets your work reach people, the way it reached me. I won't be the reason that disappears. So what are you saying? He hesitated, hating every word before he even said it. I'm saying maybe we take a step back. Not because I don't feel what I feel, because I do, more than I know what to do with. But I'd rather love you from a distance than watch you lose everything up close. She stared at him, hurt flashing across her face before she could hide it. You don't get to decide that for me. Not after everything you just said about choice. I'm not deciding for you, he said quietly. I'm asking you to let me protect the one thing I actually have to give you. She didn't answer. She turned and walked back toward the studio, and Malik stood alone in that parking lot with the sinking, sick feeling that he had just made the exact mistake. He swore he'd never make choosing for someone else what he claimed. He'd never let anyone choose for him. The following week, the misunderstanding deepened further. A tabloid published photos of Seo-ah having dinner with a well-known Korean actor, part of an entirely unrelated project meeting she hadn't bothered to explain to anyone, least of all Malik, who saw the headlines the same way the rest of the world did. Han Seo-ah moves on? He didn't call to ask what was true. He told himself it didn't matter, he'd already stepped back, hadn't he? He had no right to feel the way he felt reading those photos. The sharp, unreasonable ache of jealousy over someone he'd pushed away himself. Marcus found him staring at his phone that night, screenplay notes forgotten on the table beside him. You gonna call her? Marcus asked. And say what? I told her to move on. Looks like she listened. Man, you don't actually believe that. I don't know what I believe anymore. Meanwhile, Seo-ah sat in her own apartment, staring at her own phone, waiting for a call that never came, wondering if Malik had seen the photos, and simply decided she'd made his decision easy for him. Ji-eun found her that night curled up on the couch, still in her dinner clothes, unable to explain to anyone that the dinner had been strictly business, that she'd spent the entire meal thinking about a man who had told her, in a parking lot, that he'd rather protect her from a distance than risk her up close, and hating him a little for it, and missing him more than she'd ever admit out loud. You look terrible, Ji-eun said, sitting beside her. Thank you. I've watched you for 6 years, Ji-eun continued. Through award shows, through breakups nobody ever knew about, through every version of exhaustion this industry can produce. I have never once seen you like this. Not until him. It doesn't matter how I look, Seo-ah said. He made his choice. He chose my career over us. Did he choose that? Ji-eun asked gently. Or did he choose to protect you the only way he knew how, badly, because nobody ever taught him how to fight for something without also being terrified of ruining it? Seo-ah didn't answer, but the question sat with her long after Ji-eun left the room. Weeks passed in that strange, suspended distance, both of them aching, neither of them reaching out, both convinced the other had already moved on. Malik threw himself into pre-production, watching his screenplay come to life scene by scene, a dream finally realized and somehow, without her beside him, feeling hollow at its center. Seo-ah accepted every interview her team scheduled, gave every rehearsed answer, and felt, for the first time since becoming famous, that the fantasy everyone projected onto her had finally swallowed the person underneath completely. It was CEO Kang, of all people, who finally forced the reckoning neither of them had been brave enough to force themselves. He called Seo-ah into his office one final time, this time with a contract on his desk, the studio's franchise deal, ready for her signature, contingent on one condition buried in the fine print, a morality clause requiring her to avoid any public relationship deemed a risk to the brand for the duration of the multi-picture deal. Sign this, Kang said, and every question about Malik Carter disappears permanently. Your career is secure for the next decade. This is the opportunity of a lifetime. Seo-ah stared at the paper for a long time. She thought about every year she'd spent building this career, every sacrifice, every sleepless night as a trainee that had led her here. And then she thought about a parking lot and a man who'd rather lose her than let her lose everything else, and a truth she'd been too afraid to say out loud until this exact moment. "No," she said quietly. Kang blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said no. I won't sign a contract that requires me to erase a person because loving him publicly might cost the company money. I have spent 15 years being exactly who everyone needed me to be. I'm done." Her voice grew steadier with every word, like she was discovering her own conviction as she spoke it. "If this industry can't survive the truth that I'm human, then maybe I've outgrown what this industry is willing to let me be. You understand what you're risking." "I understand," she said, "that I've spent so long protecting an image, I nearly lost the one thing that ever made me feel like more than an image. I'm not making that mistake again." She left his office, pulled out her phone in the hallway with shaking hands, and called Malik for the first time in 3 weeks. He picked up on the second ring, like he'd been waiting. "I turned down the deal," she said before he could speak. "The one with the morality clause. I chose honesty. She stopped, steadying her breath. "I chose you, not because you asked me to, because I finally understood that protecting me by disappearing was never actually protecting me. It was just you being scared, the same way I was scared. I don't want either of us scared anymore, Malik." Silence on the line, and then, quietly, "I've been an idiot." "A little, yes. I thought I was doing the noble thing." "You were doing the safe thing," she said. "There's a difference. I'd rather have you brave than safe." "Then let me be brave," he said. "Meet me, tonight, same coffee shop. Let's stop being careful and just be honest, out loud, together, and let the rest sort itself out." She was there in 20 minutes. The months that followed weren't easy, nothing worth having ever is. The tabloids had their field day when the relationship was finally, publicly confirmed, not through a leaked photo or a forced statement, but through Seo-ah's own words. In an interview she requested herself, sitting across from a journalist and answering the question she'd deflected a dozen times before with the simple truth. "Yes, I'm seeing someone. His name is Malik Carter. He's a screenwriter. He makes me feel like a person again, and I'm not going to apologize for that." Some fans celebrated her honesty. Some didn't. Min Seo gave one more carefully worded interview, wishing them well in a tone that convinced no one, before quietly, gradually, fading from the story altogether. Her rivalry never resolved so much as simply outgrown by two people who'd stopped needing anyone else's approval to know what they had was real. Malik's screenplay finished production on schedule, buoyed by the very publicity storm that had once threatened to derail everything. Though neither Malik nor Seo-ah ever framed it that way, refusing to let the film become a footnote to gossip, rather than the work it actually was. Robert Hale, watching the final cut for the first time, reportedly told his producing partner, it was the most honest debut screenplay he'd worked with in a decade. A father and son finally learning to say the things silence had kept buried for years, brought to life by a writer who understood, better than most people, twice his experience, exactly what it cost to stay quiet, and exactly what it's worth to finally speak. The premiere was held on a warm evening in Los Angeles, the kind of night the city seems to save for its most important stories. Malik stood at the edge of the red carpet in a suit that still felt slightly unfamiliar on his shoulders, waiting the way he'd waited outside so many other doors over the years. Except this time, for the first time, he wasn't waiting to be let in. He belonged here. His name was on the poster, not as an assistant, not as a temp worker setting up ropes for someone else's spotlight. As the screenwriter, Seo-ah arrived beside him, not trailing behind for photographs, not positioned carefully for optics, but walking with him, her hand in his, in front of every camera that had once tried to turn their story into a scandal and would now, tonight, watch it become something else entirely. A reporter, microphone extended, called out the question that had followed them for months. "How did you two actually meet? There have been so many rumors." Seo-ah smiled, the real one, the one Malik had learned to recognize months ago in a quiet coffee shop, not the practice version the cameras usually got. "He kissed my poster," she said simply. The crowd laughed, delighted, cameras flashing even faster, And Malik felt his face go warm despite himself. The same helpless embarrassment from that first night in the exhibition hall, rushing back all at once. In my defense, he said into the nearest microphone, I didn't know she was standing right behind me. He thanked a piece of paper for saving his career, Seo-ah continued, clearly enjoying this far too much, and then spent the next 5 minutes trying to convince me he wasn't insane. I'm still not sure I succeeded. You didn't, she agreed. But I kissed you anyway. Eventually, she turned to him then, away from the cameras for just a moment, leaning close enough that only he could hear her. This time, she whispered, echoing words she'd said once before under very different circumstances, was that kiss good enough? Malik didn't answer with words. He answered the only way that felt true, leaning in and kissing her right there on the carpet, in front of every camera that had once tried to tear them apart, and would now, instead, capture the moment they'd finally stop being afraid to be seen. The flashes went off like 1,000 small fireworks. Somewhere in the crowd, Marcus was filming the entire thing on his phone, already composing the caption he'd post later that night. Somewhere behind them, Ji-eun allowed herself the smallest, most satisfied smile she'd worn in months. And somewhere in Korea, a photograph would run in tomorrow's papers under a headline that finally told the story accurately, without speculation, without scandal, just two people who had found each other in the most unlikely way imaginable and chosen, against every pressure that told them not to stay. Sometimes we spend years chasing the people who inspire our dreams, mistaking admiration from a distance for the real thing we're actually searching for. And then, if we're lucky, if we're brave enough to chase our own dreams instead of someone else's shadow, we discover something far more surprising, waiting for us at the finish line. Not the fantasy we imagined, but a person, flawed and real and fully seen, who was looking for exactly the same thing we were. Malik never did explain, not fully, not even to Seo-ah, why he'd chosen that particular night, that particular poster, to finally say thank you out loud. Some things don't need a complete explanation. Sometimes gratitude simply needs a moment brave enough to hold it. And sometimes, if you're very fortunate, that moment turns around and answers. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who loves meaningful stories. We'll see you in our next unforgettable journey.